So you don't always know when something's ending until you're standing in the wreckage of it. Sometimes you can see it coming. The cracks, the slow unraveling, the late night spent trying to hold something together that's already decided to fall apart. And sometimes it's sudden, loud, and very final. Either way, you wake up one day and realize this thing you built, it isn't standing anymore. We like to believe endings are dramatic, a slammed door, a clear choice, a clean break. But most of the time they're quiet. They sneak in through the edges. They show up in the way a team meeting starts feeling different, or in how you start avoiding your own inbox because you already know what's waiting there. That realization is equal parts terrifying and freeing, because when there's nothing left to protect, there's nothing left to lose. You stop worrying about breaking things and you start asking what's worth rebuilding. And I think that's something our industry is feeling collectively right now too. Between the lawsuits, the shifting brokerage models, the tech consolidations, and the AI surge, it's like we all looked up one day and realized the ground had moved beneath us. We're all just trying to find our footing in a business that doesn't look like the one we started in, regardless of when you started. That's the part people don't talk about enough, the quiet middle between destruction and direction, the space where fear and grief and relief all show up and share the same seat. It's uncomfortable, but it's also the only place where clarity can start to form. And when you're brave enough to sit in it for a minute, instead of rushing to fill it, you'll start to hear your own voice again, under the noise, the pressure, and the expectations of what everyone else thinks you should be building. And for me, that voice first showed up nearly a decade ago, during the first time I had to start over. I'm Christy, and I run a real estate team. Well, I ran a real estate team in the Seattle area, and this is the Teamwrecked Podcast. In 2016, I walked away from Sunquist Homes, my family's company, the business that had shaped 4 generations of my life. I'd spent years there, leading sales and marketing, building teams, carrying forward a legacy that existed long before I did. It was a legacy that built communities, homes, reputations, but it also built an identity I didn't realize I had tied to it until the moment that I decided to leave. Leaving wasn't just a career change, it was a full identity shift. Suddenly, I had to figure out who I was without the name, without the structure, and without the safety net. I had to rebuild my sense of purpose from the ground up. I remember walking through one of our model homes a couple months after I left. It still smelled like sawdust and fresh paint, the kind of smell that has always felt like home to me. I thought about how many houses we'd sold, how many families had started their lives in homes I'd helped design and market. But standing there, surrounded by everything familiar, I knew I couldn't stay. It wasn't mine to carry forward anymore. And if you've ever left a long-term job, partnership, or identity, you know it's disorienting as all get out. You go from the person everyone calls for answers to the person figuring out what the hell comes next. That kind of humility is both terrifying and freeing. It tests every ounce of your confidence and it strips away every illusion you had of certainty. But that's where real growth can happen. Not in accolades or titles, but in the in-between moments when you're forced to remember what actually drives you. For me, that moment, that leap, was the start of everything that came after. It was my first wreck, and the first time I learned that endings aren't always collapses. Sometimes they're just clearings. And maybe that's why this process feels familiar now. Because rebuilding, remodeling, is part of who I am. I come from a family of builders, literal builders. Somewhere between lumberyards and open houses, I guess it was inevitable that I would wind up here. Sawdust might actually be a recessive gene at this point. You can't build on a cracked foundation. Sometimes the only way to make something stronger is to strip it all the way back to the studs. And as it turns out, rebuilding isn't a one-time event in our industry. It's more like an ongoing education in letting go, something leadership will teach you over and over and over and over again. There's this unspoken rite of passage in real estate team leadership. The moment when your right-hand person leaves and takes with them part of your team, it's almost a cliche. It doesn't matter how strong your systems are or how much you care about your people. When that happens, it hits hard because it's not just business, it's personal. These are the people you built things with, the ones who made the chaos work, the ones who could finish your sentences in meetings and knew every single password that you didn't think to write down. And let's be honest, the ones that probably saved you from at least 3 calendar disasters that you didn't even know about. So when my executive assistant left, although at the time we'd promoted her to be our director of operations, it felt like someone had pulled the keystone out of an arch. Everything seemed like it was going to stay standing for a minute, and then you could feel the weight shift. The quiet in the office hit different. The rhythm was gone. But the truth is, her leaving, it wasn't anything wrong. She was ready for her next step. She took everything she learned here and built something amazing for herself, which honestly is what any good leader should want for their people. But it still leaves a hole, especially when it's unexpected and it takes you off guard. We say we lead people, but the hard part is half that job is learning to let them leave as well. What I didn't expect was the guilt that comes with that. The quiet voice that asks if I could have done something more, or seen it coming, or somehow kept things from unraveling. But I've learned that sometimes what we call failure is really just unmet expectation. The team didn't break, the season just changed. And letting go doesn't mean that I failed to hold it all together. Sometimes it just means it's time to make space for what's next. And the wildest part? After she left, after all of that uncertainty and reshuffling, we had our best year. We didn't go back and adjust our goals. We didn't lower the bar or reset expectations. And even though we ended that year with barely a third of the people we started with, we had kept our heads down and kept moving forward. On its face, that could have been a problem. But the reality was we stayed the course, and where we didn't quite hit the original target, we did hit about 90% of it. Again, with a third of the people. For me, that was a real victory. A reminder that even when the rug gets pulled out from under you, when the path you thought you were on suddenly changes, it will all be okay. You can rebuild, you can restart, you can remodel. You just have to have the presence of mind and the commitment to your goals to keep going, even through the loss, the grief, and the chaos that comes. Because if you do this long enough, you realize that leadership isn't about preventing change. It's about finding a way to stay steady through it. Which brings me to now, my latest version of the wreck, and potentially the most intentional one yet. There's something strange that happens after you make a big decision, after the meetings end, after the tears, after the emails goes out. There's this eerie, unglamorous type of calm. The files are still on your drive, the signs are still in your car, the systems are all still live, but the heartbeat's gone. You can almost hear the echo of what used to be. And that quiet is where your real work has to begin. Because before you can design what's next, you have to stand still long enough to face what was. When I finally announced to the team that we were shutting things down, I wrote about it in our weekly newsletter, the one that we've sent out every Monday, well, most Mondays for years. I told them that real rebuilding isn't cinematic. It's not swelling music or a big moment of clarity. It's just Tuesday at 10 a.m., trying to figure out if you're still the same person who started this. And not long after, someone said something to me that has really stuck. You can't rebuild what you won't release. I didn't put that line in the newsletter, but maybe I should have, because it's true. And it's something I'm having to remind myself of more than once in the days since. Before we can rebuild anything, a business, a team, or ourselves, we have to be willing to let go of what no longer fits, to admit what worked and what didn't, and where we might have gotten in our own way. When I started this podcast, or I guess am starting this podcast, I didn't want it to sound like another polished business comeback story, because that's not real life. Real rebuilding is messy. It's crying over spreadsheets. It's wondering if you still want to do this at all. It's asking whether the version of you who started all this still exists somewhere under the rubble. And it's also realizing, maybe for the first time, that I can't rebuild something stronger if I'm still trying to make it look like the last version. And that's what Teamwrecked is all about. It's the story of tearing it all down, the teams, the systems, the identity, my identity, and deciding what's worth keeping, what's worth relearning, and what's going to get left behind. Because there's strange beauty in wreckage. It forces clarity. It strips away the noise, the habits, the illusions we have of our own control. We can start to see what's real, what's working, and what was never meant to survive the next chapter. Here's the thing about starting over. It's not weakness. It's resilience in motion. It's easy to celebrate success, the sales records, the new hires, the big closings, but strength, it actually shows up in the rebuilds, in what feels like a failure, in the moments when everything feels uncertain and you keep showing up anyway, in the decisions you're making that just don't make sense to anyone else yet. Because nobody makes a motivational poster out of the real stuff, like crying in your car between showings or rewriting your budget for the 4th time. But that's leadership, not a highlight reel, but persistence through the low light reel. If you've been through this cycle enough times, you start to realize that rebuilding is less about getting back to where you were and more about becoming who you're supposed to be next. So if you're in a season where things are falling apart, a team shift like me, a business pivot, a full-scale identity crisis, then this one, it's for you. Because rebuilding isn't failure. It's just proof that you're still in the game. We rebuild because we believe there's something still worth working towards. Because even when the walls come down, the foundation, your values, your vision, your why is still there. It has to be. And when you start again, you won't be starting from scratch. You're starting from experience. And maybe the most important part, the part I'm still relearning myself, is that showing your human side isn't a liability. It's a strength. It's what builds trust. It's what connects people to your story and gives them permission to be human too, to fail too, to change. Because leadership isn't about perfection, it's presence. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is let people see the cracks that make you stronger. When you strip everything back, the titles, the systems, the brand colors, the ego, what's left is the reason you started in the first place, to help people move forward, to build something that matters, and to prove to yourself that you can. So yeah, it's scary, but it's also the best kind of terrifying, the kind that means you're still alive, you're still growing, and you're not done yet. Because rebuilding isn't the end of the story, it's just the next chapter. One of my most vivid memories after deciding to leave my nearly 15-year career with family was cleaning out my office. Years of files, notebooks, photos, and remnants of every single version of me that had ever worked there. The cubicles, the offices, I think by the time I left, I had 6 or 7 desks I'd sat at. And fallen behind my desk, covered in dust, I found a single piece of paper, a handwritten quote I didn't even remember writing down. I ended up posting this to Facebook that day. So I'm finally finished cleaning out my office, filled with 14 years of crap, blood, sweat, tears, lost sleep, failures, victories, and memories, and I found this tucked away. Who knows when I copied it down, but it seems so appropriate for it to be the last thing I found. On to new things. The quote was from Gilda Radner, and I'll admit, I had no idea who she was at the time, but it stuck with me. I wanted a perfect ending, and now I've learned the hard way that some poems don't rhyme and some stories don't have a clear beginning, middle, or ending. Life is not about knowing, having to change, taking the moment, or making the best of it without knowing what's going to happen next. It's about delicious ambiguity. Seems pretty apt for this era, too.